Tonight I'm going to present a working theory of mine relating to the Bigfoot Sasquatch phenomenon. I've said before that I think a lot of what we think we know about this cryptid is based on assumptions. Assumptions about behavior, assumptions about activity, and most importantly to tonight's episode, assumptions about location. I've hinted at this theory in other episodes, but tonight we're going to run right at it. We're going to explore the idea that far from being relegated to millions of acres of vast wilderness, the Bigfoot phenomenon is actually much, much closer to so-called civilization and urban centers than we think. Tonight, we're looking at the very real possibility that Bigfoot could actually be moving through the suburban landscape only miles away from sprawling skyscrapers and population centers. Only on this episode of The Weekly Strange. Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Weekly Strange. I'm your host, John F. Murs, author, actor, adventurer. Okay, so first things first, I am once again taking the idea of Bigfoot as some type of interdimensional being off the table for tonight's episode. I am not discounting that theory, so please, please, please don't clog the comments with a bunch of posts about it being so. It very well may be an interdimensional being. But what I'm trying to do tonight is simply eliminate that possibility because the reality is that it makes it harder if Bigfoot is not able to move through portals, etc. If instead of giving this phenomenon the power to do that, we instead constrain it to the physical limitations of being, say, a relict hominid that has to obey the same laws of physics and science and nature that we as humans do, then it makes the task of proving it capable of doing things much harder. And that's what I'm after here. I'm trying to make it harder to prove that it's real. Now, that sounds counterintuitive, but it's actually not. Because if I present this theory to you and you come away from it after watching this whole video thinking, John might be onto something there, then instead of disproving it, I've actually taken a step closer to proving it. That said, I know humans are finicky creatures, aren't we? And no doubt some of you will allow your feathers to get ruffled by this video. All I would ask is that you watch it with an open mind. I'm not trying to disprove Bigfoot's existence. Far from it. I'd be thrilled if one day I got definitive proof that it does exist. But I'm also not going to stop applying critical thinking and throw out all of that in favor of just a personal belief or faith. Now, since I came back from holiday break and my previous 2 Bigfoot videos landed, I have gotten a lot of comments on the channel, which I am grateful for. But I've also had folks reaching out to me to relate their own experiences via email and private messages. And the most interesting thing I've noticed from these messages and a few of the comments is how close their encounters were to the city of Boston. Yes, I've gotten plenty of comments and messages from folks out in western Massachusetts, the Bridgewater Triangle area, the Leominster, Methuen area, and beyond. But there have been quite a few that have all been within 10 miles of the city. Now, let's take a look at what a 10-mile radius of Boston looks like. Now, depending on where you mark the center of the city, this can obviously fluctuate, but I think one of the things that immediately stands out from this map that we're looking at is how the edges of the radius are in greenish locations. That green represents conservation land, town land, woods, forests, swampland, bogs, marshes, etc. All natural areas that house all manner of animal life. Birds, deer, coyotes, smaller mammals, rodents, insects, and perhaps even cryptids. But even within that 10-mile radius, which is mostly grayed out due to the development, there are still smaller green spaces. The Lynn Woods Reservation north of the city is 2,200 acres that supports an incredibly diverse ecosystem. The Middlesex Fells Reservation is about 2,500 acres. Cutler Park Reservation is 772 acres. Blue Hills Reservation south of the city is 7,000 acres. And southeast of Boston is Wampatuck State Forest at 3,500 acres, although it's actually part of a much larger conglomeration of green space. And even in my old neighborhood, in the city of Boston, I grew up in Jamaica Plain. At the bottom of my street, I had the 265-acre Arnold Arboretum, part of Frederick Law Olmsted's Emerald Necklace, and it was literally a minute walk from my front door. Now, while the Arboretum is beautiful, I'm ruling it out as a potential habitat because, first of all, I literally know every square inch of that space. I spent years exploring it, and it's much more of a curated botanical space than an actual forest or woods. Side note, I will say I had some interesting experiences there at night when I was practicing some of the stealth training from the martial art that I study. I would be there for hours, and there were several times when I knew I wasn't alone. Anyone who spends time in the outdoors can tell you that you know when there's something else close by. But that said, there are really no secret spots in the Arboretum, so to speak, that could even shelter a cryptid. I think the most exotic animal I ever heard about was a potential sighting of a bobcat, and as far as I know, that remained unconfirmed. Now, the point I'm making here is that there are plenty of green spaces for a cryptid to make their way closer to the city. And they could do so in two ways, land and water. You see, even if the green spaces aren't connected to each other, they're usually close enough that it wouldn't take much more than good timing to move from one to the next, especially at night when traffic is less and people are likely not paying much attention. To use my old stomping ground as an example, if I wanted to move undetected from the Arnold Arboretum and into the city, it'd be easy. The Emerald Necklace is a series of interconnected green spaces that thread through Jamaica Plain and into the Fenway and beyond to the Esplanade area near the end of the Charles River. You could travel from the Arboretum, down the Arbor Way to Jamaica Pond, then into the Riverway, which then connects further on with the Fens and the Fenway, and then down into the Charles River. Now, I'm not suggesting that Bigfoot is prowling the streets of Boston here, but when you look at things from perspective of simply trying to avoid human contact, it's actually not that difficult to do so, even in a city like Boston. And when I was in college, I walked home from Kenmore Square to Jamaica Plain plenty of times in the deep dark of night to know how few people are actually out at that time. And that's just an example of moving through a city using green spaces that are pretty small. Further out, it's even easier. And I heard from someone who had a sighting in Weston, which, if you looked at that map at the start, it's just on the edge of that 10-mile radius. And there are plenty of green spaces out in that neck of the woods as well. Towns like Lincoln, Sudbury, Wayland are all suburban with plenty of woods and forests all around them that support a nice, diverse ecosystem. But land bridges are just one method of getting closer to the city. What if they were to use the waterways instead? I'm going to point out one such example, the biggest, the 80-mile-long Charles River that stretches from its starting point in Hopkinton, dips south toward Bellingham, then turns north toward Medway, east toward Millis and Medfield, north again toward Sherburne, east to Dover and Dedham, then north through Needham and Newton, before turning east once more in Waltham, passing through Watertown and Cambridge, before emptying into Boston Harbor. A lot of that 80 miles passes through dense foliage in places where there are no trails. Yes, the closer you get to Boston, the more development there is, but even with that, it's entirely possible for a cryptid to use it for concealment. The Charles River is much cleaner than it used to be thanks to environmental regulations that stopped industrial pollution and allowed the marine ecosystem to once again flourish. People routinely fish, boat, and even swim in it, and the animal population along its banks is healthy and thriving. And this is just one of any number of rivers in Massachusetts that could be used as a means of movement by cryptids. Here's another example, although it is outside of the 10-mile radius. The Taunton River watershed, which encompasses the notorious Bridgewater Triangle. I mean, this is a huge swath of land that could easily support a population and keep them well-fed year-round. And here's another river example. The Neponset River, which is just south of the city, but snakes its way from its headwaters at the Neponset Reservoir in Foxborough, go Pats, all the way north into Dorchester Bay and Boston Harbor. This river also passes through miles of conservation area, woods, and the like on its way into the city. These three waterways constitute routes that animals and humans already use, so why couldn't Sasquatch use them as well? Or even another cryptid? The answer is they could. But now the question switches to something else. If we've established that it's entirely possible that animals like bear, deer, coyotes, bobcats, and others can use these land bridges and waterways as a means of moving closer to civilization, then so too could cryptids, whether it's Sasquatch or a dogman or any other sort of oddity. It's important to remember that animals, like humans, are lazy by design. We look for the paths of least resistance when traveling. Game trails exist for a reason. Once there's an easy route to a water supply, for example, everything else uses it too. But now the question becomes this. If Bigfoot could be close to a city like Boston, why would it choose to be? I said at the outset of this video that amateur and professional researchers make a whole lot of big assumptions about Sasquatch based mostly on experience, certain evidence, and then behavioral analysis based on primates and other species we consider to be close to the phenomenon. And that's fair to a certain extent, right? If we don't have an actual specimen to study, then we need to find the next closest thing to it. We need to study its habits and try to predict what a Sasquatch would do in a similar situation. So those who think of Bigfoot as a relict hominid tend to imagine it would prefer isolated wilderness as its main habitat. Plenty of acreage to roam across, plenty of shelter potential, food sources, etc. But what if that's wrong? Or at least not entirely 100% correct? What if some portions of whatever population exist out there prefer to be closer to human civilization? What if they're intelligent enough, as some suggest, to use our assumptions against us? Let me put it another way. Say you're conducting an escape and evasion exercise. You have one person who is trying to escape and evade a hunter force who are chasing him through the woods. The assumption is that the escapee will try to maintain as much distance and get as far ahead of the pursuers as possible. But what if instead of doing that, the escapee finds a perfect hiding spot, lays low, and then lets the hunter force pass right by them? They've penetrated the search line and are now behind the pursuers. At this point, they can head off in another direction entirely, choose to stay close to the command structure in place to monitor the exercise, or do something else entirely. Here's another example. How many times do we hear about a prison escape and the whole county, state, region starts crawling with cops looking everywhere for the escapee, only to discover in the end that they were maybe 100 yards away from the prison? The 2025 Orleans Parish jailbreak saw that in action, as did the Clinton Correction Facility escape in 2015. Prisoners often use the assumption that they will try to get as far away as possible against the pursuers. Perhaps in some way, it's almost safer to be closer to civilization than it is to be in the deep, dark woods. Perhaps it's easier to find food closer to a big city, prowling landfills and dumpsters, than it is in the wild. And perhaps there's no need to worry about leaving behind massive footprints when 1,000 other people will walk that same trail and obscure them. Like I've said before, I'm not saying that Bigfoot is in Boston, but it's certainly possible that the phenomenon could be within spitting distance of it. And when you zoom out and realize how many other cities are built more or less like Boston, fed by rivers that originate in dense woods, then the bigger picture starts to emerge that maybe we need to challenge our own assumptions more often. Because if it's possible in a place like Boston, then it's also possible in places like Manhattan, or Washington, D.C., or Detroit, or any number of other places across the world. Perhaps we make these and other assumptions to feel better. Perhaps the idea of Sasquatch in the big city is maybe a bit too close to home for many of us. It's easier to imagine them living out in the wild, far from the nearby CVS that is bordered by a spit of woods. After all, this is potentially intimidating stuff we're discussing. But at the end of the day, if we are truly searching for the answers and not just easy solutions based on personal belief, then we need to ask ourselves these questions. We need to rule out the things that are realistically unfeasible, and we need to discuss what the probability is. Only by doing so will we ever start to approach a potential understanding of this phenomenon. Okay, that is going to do it for this episode of The Weekly Strange. If you enjoyed the show, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of my new uploads. If you really like the content I'm creating, please consider joining the channel as a paid member and get access to some pretty cool perks. I will be back in a few days with a brand new episode. In the meantime, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Good night.